Hello, good evening. Well, first of all, thank you for coming tonight. I want to thank Mark and Becca and Adam, Los Angeles Filmforum for this great invitation. It has been wonderful, and showing my films yesterday in the evening was also a beautiful experience for me to see all the works together, assembled, and also in original. Projected.
Yeah, we talk about that. Yeah.
So I just want to say like a brief, or give a brief context to this lecture performance that I feel like I cannot like really distinguish the differences between these two like ideas of lecture and performance. I think it's becoming more of a performance, but it started in relation to an installation work I presented in 2010 while I was finishing my MFA, and I was traveling. Well, I'm originally from Chile. I grew up there, and I moved in Canada, in Montreal, in 2006. I was basically confronted for the first time to study cinema in English. I didn't speak English before that, so it was quite like a battle, a struggle between moving between cultures, landscape, but also languages. Like in Montreal, like also we speak French. So this installation sort of happened to be an unconcluded project to me personally, in a personal level, and it stayed open, and I'm very happy that this came through. It was like an opportunity to actually take on board of an element or a component that I developed all throughout that process of making this installation while filming in Super 8, mostly in the south of Chile. And at the same time, working on this writing that I was basically, it was sort of like structuring the process of making this work. It became to be a very intimate book, in a way, a personal book, through my journey, which was also shared with my mother at moments. And for the installation itself, when I went back to Montreal to start working on the editing and how I was going to put into shape this, I structured the piece especially into 3 sections. It was a multi-projection installation piece using digital projection and 60mm projection, and also TV monitors looping certain sequences. And I had this idea of somehow including this text, but it was way too intimate at the time for me to do it. It was a big step, and there is something interesting in this process of making now this happen, that it has to do the boundary line between aggression, I guess, and intimate space where there is some kind of like violence. How do we expose intimate thinking or experiences to other people, especially when we don't know those people. So this is a reenactment, I would say, in some manner, of this component. I'm basing now, I suppose before it was the text was structuring the installation piece in an invisible manner. Now it's becoming visible, and I think the films are being structured by the text. So that's what I'm gonna. Yeah, I think we can start.
And so we'll.
I don't know how it feels actually. Yeah.
We'll talk about it later. Well, we have these other 3 films now.
Yes.
By other artists, 2 other artists, and I guess I could say briefly what they are, and then maybe you could say something about why we picked these films.
Yes.
So we're going to see 3 films now in a row. The first is a film called 3175 by Kurt Kren, which I think most people I know that have seen this film, it's also one of their favorite films. It's one of my favorite films. It's one of your. It's really a quite remarkable film that was made over the course of a 21-day period, where Kurt Kren he bolted his camera to the windowsill, looking out on the yard of this farmhouse he was staying in, and And then he also constructed a series of elaborate matte boxes that would go in front of the lens that would reveal only a little bit of, like several windows worth of the image that the camera could see. And then each day he wound the same film through the camera, and then rewound it, and then the next day he exposed it again, but each day he changed these masks that were in front of the camera. And so the end result is sometimes you see up to 21 days worth of stuff happening on screen at the same time, like where the landscape is kind of composited in this way, just all done in the camera. And that's about 9 minutes or so, 8.5, 9 minutes. And then we'll see a film that's actually a quite little known film by Chick Strand, Los Angeles legend, and just one of the, I think, the greatest of all time. A film called By the Lake from 1986, which is film of hers, which is really quite excellent, but it's just one of those films of hers that never really showed around very much, and so it seems like a very nice opportunity to show it tonight. And that's about 9 or 10 minutes, and then we'll follow that with one of her really great major works, which is a very semi-autobiographical called Elasticity from the mid-70s, and that's about 23 minutes or so. So, do you want to talk about why we picked these films?
Well, the film Asil, I've seen it a few times, fortunately, but the other two films by Chick Strand, it would be the first time for me to see them. It's a very rare occasion, to have the opportunity to see these films screened. We presented Chick Strand work in Montreal, I think back in 2007, and it was, for me, one of my first experiences being exposed to experimental cinema, what we call experimental cinema. And I think, well, it was incredibly revealing, because and up to that time, I had very almost, it was very rare to have access to actually see original work in Chile. We will even learn, I studied fine arts, and we will learn about, specific artists, etc., but mostly either on books or photocopies, and the photocopies will be photocopies of a photocopy. So, one of, I think choosing these films to me is going to the base of my experience being in Montreal and seeing experimental cinema. And it's a strange that exactly that year these two retrospectives were presented and co-presented with I think both with the Festival du Nouveau Cinéma and Double Negative, which is a collective based in Montreal that I'm part of, and I became a member in 2006. It was founded in 2004. So when I arrived basically to Montreal and went to the film school in 2006, these events were starting to be in place, and it was an incredible retrospective of both artists. And I was just, fascinated by it. I had no knowledge on, the history of experimental cinema or anything like that. And also I saw it from a very, unlearned eye, I guess. So I'm very excited to see two films of Chick Strand that I haven't seen. I was just fascinated by the synopsis, actually. I was especially Elasticity, and in relationship to the performance we just saw. And I would like to read it loud, actually.
I think there's some serious connections.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful, I don't know how the film is and how, these connections will be, but I just love the synopsis. Impressionistic surrealism in 3 acts. The approach is literary, experimental with optical effects. There are 3 mental states that are interesting: amnesia, euphoria, and ecstasy. Amnesia is not knowing who you are and wanting desperately to know. I call this the white knight. Euphoria is not knowing who you are and not caring. This is the dream of meditation. Ecstasy is knowing exactly who you are and still not caring. I call this the memory of the future. this is an autobiographical film, well, funded by the American Film Institute. But no, it's like, yeah, I just read it and I was like, I asked you first now about this film. So yeah, I mean, let's experience them.
Okay, so the first film is silent and the other two are sound, and I'll just, there'll be a minute or two as I rethread the reels in between, so, but we'll run straight through. All set?
Yes.
Get a comfy seat. Okay. Maybe now we're ready for Q&A.
Or we can just Q&A or just talk.
Yeah, we can just talk. What did you, so I have to ask, because you've been wanting to see specifically elasticity for some time. What did you think?
Well, I mean, both actually. Yeah, Elasticity and By the Lake, they're phenomenal. Both films. Elasticity is a film I feel like you have, like it's like to see it so many times because it has, I feel personally, so many layers and playing with language and the relationship with image, sound, like all these like universes, you know, it's like it's plural. It's a work that is plural. Yeah, very complex. Very complex. It has humor too. Yeah, it's the kind of work I feel like it takes time to digest as well.
It definitely helps to see it multiple times.
Oh, definitely.
And I've seen it actually quite a few times, but I still discover new things, and like I'll notice things I never noticed. And every time I see it again, I actually have forgotten quite a bit of it. Because she's doing so many things, and it's very free associative in some ways too, like different than a lot of her other work actually. So I find that it's her film that I most have trouble remembering each time I see it, but in a good way, because it's very ephemeral in a way too, in addition to being very complex.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I mean, there's so many things happening simultaneously or juxtaposed, or you know, both, no, like juxtaposed but simultaneously in our mind, I guess. But it's so sensorial at the same time. So I feel like it's a work we can never fully understand, and it's not meant to be understood neither, maybe. Yeah, it's in that sense. It's beautiful that kind of, I don't know if it's a contradiction, no? In terms of like using so many resources or a different medium in terms of language and sound and images and fun footage and mixed with footage she shot. But then it's like, it's all this collision like happening in a more like subjective manner, which really, and text on that.
The autobiographical component is actually really, it's pretty extensive, but it's on a level that we can't necessarily always know exactly what she means by it. But I know, for instance, these shots of the woman carrying this big burden, like that was Chick. Like she was seeing herself like carrying just all this shit around in her life, like film and like her books, and like the earlier in the film, I think she's looking around her house and her city where the dog has torn up everything, but there's just books everywhere, and the way in which that's a portrait of her. But this burden, like she had her found footage usage had a tendency to be very projectable in the sense that she's projecting a lot of autobiography onto it, and sometimes they're in jokes and stuff that we probably couldn't get. If Betsy Bromberg were here, she would know a lot of the references actually, because she talked to Chick extensively about these things. So well, you got to see it again. Bring it to Montreal. Yes,
definitely. And well, like By the Lake also is incredible, beautiful print.
That's a restoration print actually.
Congratulations. Beautiful print. It's also very I don't know, it's sort of like a dream, I feel, the whole film, you know, like it's a very it's shocking at the beginning. It's
I love the beginning.
No, it's very like, but you know, I like also that she showed, like, as a women filmmaker, like things I haven't seen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it means so much that it's a woman like showing that, you know, and like a way of seeing the landscape, the social landscape, the cultural landscape, but also the human body. You know, whether it's female and male, it feels like there is no prejudice. Like it's very freely the way she's. It doesn't make me feel like as if there is an intention behind. You know, like I would think, especially at this time, that there will be an intention. Like if you show like naked body and how you show the naked body, I feel like it will be like generally, it's kind of very thought through. Especially maybe in the context of also feminism at the time and how you will embrace the woman's body, you know, like in terms of image or sound or text. But here I feel like she really, I don't know, it makes me feel like she was really free in the way she was performing as filming, but also portraying and presenting, you know, the human body beyond, you know, like this idea of gender. So
well, she was very curious and observant, and also very confident in her observation. Like Chick has a film called Fever Dream. Have you seen that one? So, and this is a very, very sensual black and white film of two women massaging each other. And it's based on an erotic dream that she had. And she was like, I want to see two women massaging each other, so I'm going to film it. Like, it was that confidence of like her reaction was literally, that's hot, I want to film that, and I want to show that, and I want the film to be erotic and hot. And, you know, like, she really thought very, very confidently in those terms, which I think is really refreshing, actually. Yeah. Like this guy dancing in kind of a trance at the end, like I don't know for a fact, but I'm positive she thought this guy has such a magnificent body, like because he really does. You know, it's like this kind of like really you kind of can't take your eyes off him. Yeah, and I'm sure she thought, holy shit, I have to film this guy. I mean, she really had this. Yeah, like I mean, the complexity of her work in part is aided by the simplicity sometimes that she's approaching the subjects, like not with a lot of preconceived notions, like you're saying. It's like highly observational and reactive, I think. But I feel if I can maybe in a not forced way transition to talking about your work, you are also working, I think, in a very, very reactive way to landscape. And I mean, as we saw last night and also tonight, although there's a lot of process involved at times, like where you're working out certain exposures and lengths and certain frame rates, etc., and also rephotography techniques, and this requires a lot of process and a lot of planning. There's a way in which you're very, very responsive to the landscape without preconceived notions as well, I would say. But do you feel that way? I mean, are you you go to a place and you are saying, okay, what can I find here?
Yeah, I think in general, yeah, I don't preconceive. I mean, we talked a little bit about this, I think, yesterday, where I don't actually preconceive a structure before filming. I think more and more, but I think it has to do also with gaining experience and learning the tools and learning, you know, like the gap between filming and observing, filming, and what you're gonna see, especially when you film frame by frame. It's very rare that I film continuous. It's like it frightens me, you know, scares me. It's like it's a strange feeling. Even the sound of the bullets just running
like filming at normal speed, you mean?
Yeah. It's like it's very, very strange to me. So normally I film frame by frame, or I will film continuously, but short segments. And I will try to embrace the moment and be more like, I think it's a question of like developing or trying to grow within a sense of awareness, and at the same time leaving space for intuitively approach the space, the camera, my own feelings, like physical, whether if I'm cold, warm, tired, energetic, or having like a connection with all of that, and align myself to train myself, because it's a training as well, and it takes time. You know, it's like the first week of if I go to a place and I'm intending to film, the first week is gonna be just basically. I mean, I can use like anecdote like from Altiplano, the film like I showed yesterday, when like me and 2 other filmmakers went to the north of Chile and Argentina, film, and one of them was John Price, who is like someone trained, and he films in documentary, so he's trained
cinematographer for a living.
Yeah, I mean he's an incredible cinematographer, and the first day he already had I don't know how many rolls already shot, no?
Like
and
each one a masterpiece, probably.
I mean, he brought like a 35mm camera, a 60mm camera, and like boxes of film, and yeah, he films continuous shooting, so yeah, it makes sense. I'm like more frame by frame, so I don't need too many rolls, But I remember being in my first roll when he already finished so many rolls the first day, and he's like, "Oh, you gotta speed up, huh?" and I sort of felt threatened by that, like sort of complete difference, and he's like also different skill, like I'm small, and he's huge, his tripod was huge, the camera was huge, everything was huge, and the little camera, my phone. And it was interesting to have that, shock experience of like someone, "Oh, you gotta speed up, you're filming." And I'm like, it's sort of through that shock made me reflect like, oh no, actually this is the way it has to be. It's like, and I didn't know until John told me basically the counterpoint, that I realized actually it's like my first week of filming, it has to be very slow. I cannot like, just put film and just like shoot. It's like it has to be like much more like sort of like a approach experience to landscape and how I situate myself in relationship to that. And at some point it's like a trance basically. At some point it just like wakes up, and then it's like very freely, and I can very easily I can know what like I film it was right to me, or right is not the right word, but something that feels connected somehow. So yeah, that was like interesting, like also like how learning from other filmmakers, like different process of filmmaking and how we approach, like film and sort of how do I can say, like to sort of like confirm something that intuitively we develop in our life, and this has to do with anything, that we sort of like do things in a certain manner, and sometimes like we don't feel it should be the way, and no, actually that's the way it is, and you just leave it as such,
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Can you tell me your use of language in these versus the silent ones? But what was the reason you did some spoken live, and then I assume that over the loudspeakers that was pre-recorded, and maybe was someone else also speaking, or was it all you?
The live speaking was me, and then there were other 3 voices that were pre-recorded. Yeah. The reason has to do with, well, first of all, this whole was like, I did not rehearse before this. This is the first time this happened. And the idea of recording voices had to do with the initial idea I had in 2010 with the installation, where I had this like 3 different spaces. It was like a very long gallery space, and I basically divided landscape, diverse landscape in the first space, massive ocean water in the second, and on the third was more like nightly sky architecture, to put it in a way. And when I thought about including this text in the installation, I had this idea of asking 3 or 4 women that I know, like important to me, to read this text. So I was not even part of it. It's like I would be like just as a spectator there. And I liked the idea at the time of well, more than like, I mean, the fact was that all these different women had different origins, you know, like some of them were coming from Lebanon, some others were Anglo-Canadian, other ones like French-Canadian, and someone was from South America. So I like this idea of like all these different voices, these different ways of like reading, or also the accents, you know, involved on this. So even one of them, well, in this case, for what we saw tonight, I asked 3 friends that they are all living abroad, though we met in Montreal, and they were sort of postcards. I sent a text, they sent me the recording, and some of them I re-recorded using a cassette recorder and recorded again in digital. And some of them talked in Spanish, some others like sort of, not that they refused, they didn't refuse like as a statement, but they were like, oh no, like naturally they just didn't feel like reading in Spanish. But it was interesting to see that too, as a reaction, you know? It's like I didn't give much instruction either. My idea was like to sort of, this is the text, read it, send it back to me. And I wanted to combine that with my own reading as well. So I chose basically 3 segments that to me is, like, they speak very deep about how I was feeling at the time. So yeah, I mean, I think it has to do with this sort of personal connection with this this sort of constellation of women energy that have been present in my life throughout this year, in Montreal, and when I traveled to Chile, yeah. Well, and there is like a 5th voice there, like, or 4th, yeah, 5th voice, which is Carolee Schiniman. That also, at that time I was working with a filmmaker, Malena Szlam, who was making a film about Carolee Schiniman's work and life. So we were going very often to her house, and yeah, I mean, to me, the experience of meeting Carolee and going through her work extensively, you know, from her diaries to life books to paintings and her writing, like it just like learning all this range, like exquisite, rich body of work that has, I don't know, like a colored everything in her life, you know, from the house to the pond and the forest around and the cats. And so that was like a very important experience for me, as like, yeah, like just in those years where I was like really going through the transition of migrating from one country to another, and changing, you know, like, or acquiring language, new languages, new ways of communicating, new like social codes, you know. It's like you have to shift everything. It's like from how you say hi to how you express your emotions, you know. It's like a whole new like rebirth in a way. So at those years is when I also met her, and yeah, that was just very revealing for me.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank you so much again for 2 amazing nights, and I hope you enjoyed your first visit to LA so far. And yeah, please join me in thanking